Now that we know how to model in Blender, it's time to take a look at our render settings and how rendering works in Blender. So to access your render settings, you can click on this first tab in the Properties editor, and then at the very top we have our render engines. By default, Blender has Eevee renderer. This is real-time renderer, so it's a bit faster, but you can get really realistic results with it. For that, you'll need to use cycles. So you can switch your rendering type here, or the render engine, and then you can use a device. So with cycles, you can use your CPU or processor, or you can use your graphics card or GPU. Now you can see this GPU is, I can't sort of use it because it's grayed out. That's because I have to go into the edit menu and then preferences. And then under system, we can enable the type of graphics card that we have. So if you have NVIDIA's graphics card, try to use CUDA or this optics renderer. But if you're on AMD graphics card, you might see something called OpenGL. I think it might be this one. I don't know about that, but there should be OpenGL. I think it works with AMD graphics cards. So I'm going to select optics. Actually, let's go with CUDA. And then we can just close out of that, and you can see that it is no longer grayed out, which means I can use my graphics card. Down here we have our samples. So the more sample you add, the cleaner the image is going to become, but at the cost of more render time. So we're going to leave everything at default for now. Now, below this we have our output settings. We're not going to touch these just yet because we don't need these in this video. So you can set up the resolution at which you want to render images out of your 3D software. In this case, Blender. You can select the file type that you'll be using, where you want to save those images, and all that sort of stuff in this tab. So let's take a look at how rendering works. So the way rendering works is very similar to photography in real life. We need a camera, and you can see by default Blender comes with this one. You can add multiple cameras, or you can delete the ones you don't need. Then you set up lights in your scene, and then you can render images out of Blender. So by default we have this camera, and to adjust this camera there are a lot of different ways. Now you can use your standard grab and sort of moving and rotation, but that would be very inefficient. The next method that you can use is you can press 0 on the numpad, and it's going to sort of look through that camera. So this will be our final render, anything within this sort of boundary. You can press N to open the sidebar, and then under view there's an option. Let's go ahead and expand this a little bit more. And there should be an option called lock camera to view. So now every time when you sort of rotate with middle mouse button, you can when you pan around and all that sort of stuff, your camera sort of manipulates along with it. Now this is one way to sort of adjust it, but I personally don't like to use this option, but it's there if you want to use it. Now what I like to do is that when I'm inside this camera view, I just press Shift plus tilde. So this tilde key is right below the escape key, and it sort of attaches it to my cursor, and I can sort of look around just like when I'm playing games. And then I can use W to go forward, S to go back, A to go left, and D to go right. And I can press Q to go down, E for going up, and if you hold on Shift, it's going to make it faster. So it's just like playing a shooter game on the computer. So it makes it much more easy to move the camera around. And you can left click to finish the movement. And if you want to cancel out of it, for example, if I sort of move my camera here and I'm not happy with that, I can just right click and it's going to cancel out it. So you can see that it makes it really easy to sort of adjust our camera. Next, we need lights in our scene. So let's go ahead and set up a very basic scene. Let's go ahead and press Shift A. Under Mesh, we're going to add a plane object. Let's scale it up really big like that. Let's tap into edit mode, select this edge, and then we can extrude it out on the Z-axis like that. Let's go ahead and select this edge again, Control B to bevel, and we can add more cuts like that to give it sort of shape like that, and then we can right click and shade smooth. Now let's go ahead and move this up as sort of a platform, and we can scale it up if we want to. Just a tiny bit scale down, so just adjust this a little slightly, and then we can add this monkey head like that, and let's just sort of place it slightly like that. So we're sort of creating a very basic scene, and by default we have this one light that's going to sort of illuminate this. So at the top we have our wireframe mode. Solid shading is the mode that we're currently in. Then we have our material preview. When we click here, it uses a bit of default lighting. So there's an HDRI image, and HDRI are 360 degrees images that sort of wrap around the 3D scene, and it sort of gives light to our 3D scene. We can click on this drop down, and you can see this is the image that Blender is currently using. We can select a different type, and you can see how it sort of immediately changes the effect. We can change the rotation, and you can see how the lighting sort of changes a little bit. So this is a quick way to sort of preview your materials, but it's not going to give you really realistic results, but it's a good way to sort of quickly put some basic materials in your 3D scene. So for example, let's go ahead and select this cube and then click on this material icon, and we have this default material, so we're going to remove that. Let's go ahead and add a new material slot, click on new, and I think we're going to just leave this at let's actually just change it to something like orange color, just sort of yellowish. And then we're going to select this monkey head, and we're going to use the same material that we just created for the cube, just like that. And down here you can see we have blur and other things like that, and then we have the world opacity. I think it just shows it in the world, so you can see that the image that I was talking about, so you can see sort of wraps around our 3D scene. And we can also remove the blurriness if we want to, so we can blur that. And then here we have the strength of the light, and then the next button that we have is for rendering. So that enables our rendering engine, and whichever engine is selected here, it's going to enable that. So let's go ahead and start with Eevee, and then we can start rendering, and you can see immediately everything becomes dark, and now it's using the lights that we have in our scene instead of the default lighting that Blender comes with. So you can see that is a real-time render, so it's really fast, but it's not able to produce like very photorealistic results, but it's good for a lot of the time. It depends on the project that you'll be working on. So if you're just creating something low poly, like cartoonish, then Eevee would be much better choice than Cycles. But if you want something photorealistic, then going with Cycle makes more sense. So let's go ahead and change that to Cycles, and now you can see that it takes a bit more time to sort of clean the image. So by default we have this point light, so let's go ahead and select that and delete that. And now we're going to press 0 on the numpad, and it's going to move into the camera. Press Shift tilde, and let's just sort of adjust the camera angle slightly. So just sort of adjusting like that. And let's move out of the camera view for now. And we're going to start adding some lights and stuff. So press Shift A to open the add menu, and then under lights we have the point light, sun, spot, and area. Let's start with the point light. Let's press G to grab along the Z-axis to move. Now point light is going to emit light in all direction, and we can click on this icon here for the data of the light, and then here we have some settings. Now when you create the light, you can change the type of light that you'll be using afterwards. So you can see we have point light, then we have the sunlight, and immediately it sort of brightens everything. Then we have the spotlight, we have area light. So with each light we have the color of the light, we have power, by default is just 10 watts, and just like in real life, the light sort of decays over the distance, so the further away the light from the objects, and the sort of lower the light effect will be on the objects. So let's go ahead and increase this to something like maybe 250, because we will need a lot of light power, and we can sort of move it. So you can see that it sort of emits light in all directions. The sunlight and the position of the light itself doesn't sort of affect the light, it's just the direction. So let's reduce this back to something like maybe 1. And if I press R to rotate, and as soon as I rotate, you can see how it sort of gives us the sunset effect, and then it just like in real life, the way sun works, it's going to give you the same result. So usually if you want to create sunlight, you can either create the sunlight or you can use an HDRI image. So by default, we don't have any HDRI image in the render mode. It just appears in the render material preview. So we're going to see how we can set that up in the next video. And the next type of light that we have is spotlight. So with spotlight, you can see that it's sort of it's a spotlight. So let's go ahead and increase the power to something like 500, and you can see that there's the sort of effect. We might need to increase it even more. So let's go with something like 1000. Actually, let's go with something like 5000. So as you can see that it sort of gives us this spotlight effect. So we have the radius of the light, and then we have the area light. So area light is like a plane, and okay, so for some reason I think it's bugged again. Let's go ahead and delete that, and we're going to create a new area light from scratch. Let's move it up, and you can see that just like that. So there's our area light. It's like a square shape that we can scale up. So the more you scale it up, the softer the shadows are going to be. And let's okay, so Blender glitched out. I think I might need to close Blender and reopen. So I'll try and save the file and see if I can fix this bug. Okay, so I was able to recover my scene, and so there's our light. The more you scale it up, the softer the light is going to affect your scene, and then again we can increase the power. So let's go with like really high power. So let's go with something like maybe 8000. Now it's going to light our scene up. So as I scale it down, you'll notice that the shadows become more sharp and sharp. So you can increase that, and it's going to sort of give you the best results. So it's just a mist light in one direction. So usually when you want to create studio lights, you would want to use this sort of area lighting, and you can also use this for creating ceiling lights and those kinds of things. So this is sort of the mist use light for me in a lot of the projects that I create in Blender. So you can see that we can sort of set up the lights, and then when we press 0 on the numpad, it's going to show us our camera view, and then we can adjust some settings. So let's go to our camera in our outliner. We have the camera here, and when we do that, then we have the camera tab. So here we have the camera type. We can use perspective, which is going to give us that 3D depth, but if you want to create orthographic view, which sort of removes that depth, you can also do that. And then we have the focal length. By default it's set to 50 millimeter, but if you want to sort of get more close-up shots, then you can increase it. If you want to get more wider look, so for example, one of the sort of famous lens type is 35 millimeters. You can also sort of create that. Let's go with 50 for now. And here we have the shift, so we can sort of shift that if you need to. And here's the safe area if you want to add that. And then as you change that, so you have a lot of things. So here we have this option which sort of highlights the area that will not be rendered in the final image, and you can change the transparency for that. So this is kind of a useful thing. And then we also have this depth of field, so you can enable that to add blurriness to the background, and then you can sort of select the object that you want to focus on, and it's going to make it easier for you to sort of focus on that object. And then down here you can adjust the settings. Now f-stops and these kinds of would become more technical for this course, so if you want to learn more about this, I would recommend watching how mirrorless or DSLR cameras work. A simple tutorial on YouTube will be enough for you to sort of learn these basics. So you can see that it's a very basic concept. So we sort of set up our camera, and then we add lights to our 3D scene, and then we render those images out. So right now you can see that we're rendering out a full HD image. So if we go back to the second tab for the output, and we change it to more of a square resolution, like 1080x1080, so you can see it's going to give me more of a square. So this can be good for social media and those kinds of things. But if you're rendering for sort of a video, so in that case you would want to use a kind of a resolution that is current standard, and usually people render at 1080p. And down here we have the frame rate and those kinds of things. So that sort of covers up the basics of rendering in Blender.